Welcome back to the Ideas Digital Forum. My name is Leila Timmons, and I'm the curator and manager of exhibitions and collections here at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. To begin, I would just like to acknowledge that the Robert McLaughlin Gallery is situated on the ancestral and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation and the traditional territory of the Mississauga Nation. For me, a territorial acknowledgement is an important reminder that we are all treaty partners and a call to continue to recognize our co-commitment to each other and to this land that we're so lucky to work on. As a curator, I would also highly recommend, if you have not seen our exhibitions yesterday, to please check out the two wonderful shows that we have on, as well as the show that you're situated in. But Public Notice is curated by Sonia Jones, and Anabawin, curated by Danielle Printup, shares some really beautiful and important propositions about treaty and how to uphold these bonds. So I'd encourage you to check it out. I was thinking a lot this morning about yesterday's proceedings, and I just wanted to share how grateful I am for the tenacity and generosity of our artist presenters yesterday. I strongly believe that artists are the reason why we're all here, and it's clear that artists have been leading these conversations on digital technologies for a long time. And it's important for institutions to listen carefully when artists are sharing so generously, and to be curious and open to what they're saying. I was thinking about the simplicity of Steve Daniels' message that art that is working is going to break. And it's prescient and telling. And what I hear in that statement is that this art and in this digital moment, it demands collaboration, not only to fix what is broken, but it also applies more broadly to thinking about the larger solutions and how our institutions can be adaptive to this change. It also highlights, importantly, the relationship between artist, institution, and our audiences, and requires us to think about these relationships in new ways. And excitingly, it requires us to strengthen our networks between each other and to shift where this authority lies. It's challenging work, but it's vital work, and it's really exciting for us all to be discussing it together. I would like to thank all the artist presenters from yesterday, and also to the ones that are speaking today. I would also like to thank the important generosity of our supporters, EQ Bank and Surface Impressions, sorry about that, as well as to recognize the Canada Council for the Arts and the Digital Strategy Fund, through which this event was made possible. I would now like to invite Zainab Verji, Executive Director of OAG, who will introduce our first session.
Yes, so good morning, everyone, and Leila, thank you. And you know, Leila is so right. For us, in our work, in our business, the artist is the bottom line. Without artists, there would be no art, and there would be no reason for us to be here today to talk about that really, you know, how do we show their work, how do we engage with them, and the practices in the context that we are in, which actually is, at this moment in time, very challenging on many levels. Recently, I had in this article, are Canada's municipal art galleries in crises in Canadian art? If you've not had time to look at it, I'd welcome you to and ask you to look at it. One of the reasons is that I think I've learned so much over my decades of working with municipalities. I've worked with 4 different mayors, starting with Gordon Campbell when he was the mayor in Vancouver, and he founded the Vancouver Arts Initiative, which really led to Vancouver's first culture plan. This is like, I think, early 90s, and went on to work with others, and with the most recent being Hazel McCallion, who was the mayor for, I don't know, 100 years at the city of Mississauga. Well, 50 years. She's 100 herself now. So. And she started her career when she was 50 years old. A very powerful, small C mayor, very anti-cultural kind of mayor who was, you know, whose task force that she pulled together demanded that she actually needed to think about culture, given that it was Canada's 6th largest city. Anyway, there was many stories there, but I won't get into those. Challenging environment. But the reason that I bring this up is because today's presentations will at least have 2 presentations, 2 case studies coming from municipalities. Now, being the ED of the OAG, And working with the membership and the regional galleries, we see increasingly how difficult a context Ontario's municipal and regional galleries are working in. We have now a very difficult provincial government that's come in that can challenge us in all sorts of ways, and also how municipalities are dealing with, there's more and more need for galleries to move away from their initial mandates, their real mandates, and act as sort of adjuncts to community rec and parks. Offer dance, offer yoga, offer Zumba, take care of its citizens in particular kinds of ways, etc. So, and I think today we're going to hear, some and on top of that, now we've got sort of this digital arena coming in, but I think what we'll also find out is that some of the smaller galleries have the ability to make things happen, and because they're more nimble, they're not necessarily, in the case of the new media gallery, they don't have a board, for example, etc. So I think it's going to be a very exciting session ahead. So I'm now going to introduce Rozemin Keshvani, who is our first presenter. And we're delighted to have her. Rozemin has come in from the London, UK. She's an independent curator and art critic whose practice focuses on excavating and recreating undiscovered contemporary histories. She has guest lectured in many places, including the ZKM Centre for Arts and Media, the Chelsea School of Art, and the Henry Moore Institute, and has also curated several research exhibitions in contemporary spaces. I recently worked with Rozemin on the Aga Khan's Diamond Jubilee International Art Gallery, where she was invited to come in as a faculty member and work with the community there. And very exciting, she just finished, hot off the press, this amazing book. And it's just come out. It's Art, Anarchy, Apostasy, Counterculture, and the New Avant-Garde, published by Koning Books in London, and she worked with Peter Wiebel and Alex Hell. So congratulations to you. And so we look forward to hearing what you have to say about the Whitechapel. Please welcome Rozemin.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, I'm really impressed that everyone is here this morning. First of all, let me thank the Ontario Association of Art Galleries and also the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, who has done such a wonderful job in organizing this really exciting and I think very topical and needed conference. Thank you so much to Zainab and Jessica and Linda. I'm not sure where Linda is, but Jessica, who's behind here. Hi, Linda. Jessica, who's in the back, who we don't see all the time, but who's making this all possible on the electronic and digital side. So the topic of my conversation today is Electronic Superhighway. This was an exhibition that took place at the Whitechapel Art Gallery in 2016, January, until I think it closed in about April. And it's a very interesting exhibition because it actually began from that moment. When you walked into the gallery, you were seeing work that was literally just completed. So from that moment of January 2016, and the exhibition actually involved a reverse chronology. So you were walking backwards in time. Let's see if I can make this work. There we are. There's a picture of the Whitechapel. The Whitechapel is a really amazing space with a fantastic history. It is one of these areas in London which has become gentrified, and as everyone who works in the art community knows, this is one of the wonderful things that we can sell art galleries to the business community. but on the other hand is always a really difficult issue for artists and the people who are living in those neighborhoods. So this was traditionally a very impoverished neighborhood. It was a Jewish community, and then more recently a Bangladeshi community where you can get some of the most amazing Indian food. And a vegan-friendly neighborhood for sure. So that is where the exhibition happened. And as I said, it charts a course backward in time, examining how artists have pioneered digital forms of art, taking as its backdrop the prevailing context of the internet, post-internet art of our networked culture. I'm just going to see if I can, okay. And it's hard because I'm trying to do two things at the same time. So the conceptual starting point, according to the co-curator Omar Kolev, is a 1974 paper authored by the Korean-American artist Namjoon Paik. It was called Media Planning for the Post-Industrial Society. The 21st century is now only 26 years away. Imagining television as the technology that would foster globalization, Pike used the term electronic superhighway to describe the emergence of a high-speed, direct connectivity, which he presciently described as a broadband communication network, or electronic superhighway, which would include not only television and video, but audio cassettes, telex, data pooling, continental satellites, microfiches, private microwaves, and eventually fiber optics on laser frequencies. I think it's really interesting to note that paper and to note the starting point, well, in this case for the exhibition, the end point, but this starting point of 1966, 1967, this paper was in a 1974 paper, but just to have an understanding of how far back it is that these ideas were actually in play and being explored by artists. The pioneering media theorist Marshall McLuhan famously wrote, "When faced with a totally new situation, we tend always to attach ourselves to the objects and to the flavor of the recent past. We look at the present through a rear view mirror. We march backwards into the future." Electronic superhighway emulates this prescription, taking as its starting point its then present moment in January 2016 and looking backward in time to reveal a picture that is far more complex, interconnected, and potentially dangerous than is apparent in our world where nearly all human relations, activities, and decision-making is increasingly regulated, functionalized, and distributed in the form of vast interconnected flows of data governed by algorithmic procedures. Featuring over 150 artworks from 73 artists, the exhibition presented an ambitious and dizzying survey of work that was nevertheless carefully choreographed to imitate the seeming anarchy of the internet. In seeking to tell the story of a post-internet art world, it aimed to trace a narrative connecting today's generation of post-millennials with artists of the previous generations. And that is something that is really important and that we often forget and is a challenge for contemporary curators, is to find ways, first of all, difficult as it is for us to get our minds around the new work that is being made by artists and is being pioneered, and the collaborative work and interdisciplinary work, but then to be able to trace that back to things that were happening in fluxus, things that were happening in conceptual art, and yet it's really, really important that we find a way to embrace that narrative and make those narratives clear for audiences. And I think also for the artists who are working in these areas, because often it's not obvious that your language or your discourse actually has a history, especially when it seems to be materially so distinct and well-defined. And that's often one of the issues that any avant-garde actually faces. So that's just another image that gives you a sense of, you know, how the exhibition was curated. Now, someone raised this yesterday. So the exhibition takes us on a journey that's completed 50 years prior in 1966 with the nascent collaborations between Robert Rauschenberg and the visionary engineer of Bell Laboratories, Billy Kluver, that resulted in Experiments in Art and Technology, EAT, an organization that would, over the course of its 10 years, involve hundreds of artists and produce several landmark exhibitions to suggest that today's interdisciplinary approach in artistic practices can be traced back to these early collaborations. Experiments in Art and Technology, the first of which collaborations resulted in the groundbreaking 9 Evenings Theatre and Engineering, was held from the 13th of October till the 23rd of October 1966 at the 25th Street Armory, New York. Participants included a who's who of the American avant-garde, most notably composers and performers who had already collaborated at Black Mountain College. John Cage, Lucinda Childs, Merce Cunningham, Alex Hay, Deborah Hay, Steve Paxton, Robert Rauschenberg, David Tudor, Robert Whitman, and the Brazilian-Swedish artist Ovind Fahlström. The diverse use of electronics as an artistic medium for live performances was explored here in all its potential, while a second milestone was Robert Breer's floats and Fujiko Nakaya's, excuse me for the poor pronunciation, fog installation of a manufactured clouds at the 1970 Expo Pavilion in Osaka that was sponsored by Pepsi. When explaining the rationale for involving artists in the development of technologies, Billy Kluver declared as follows: "We all know," and remember this is in 1966, "we all know technology has become a part of our lives. And now we can see absolutely no reason why it should not become more so. No sound has been heard from another culture to oppose Western technology. The faster the underdeveloped countries have it, the faster they want it. On the other end of the spectrum, we now have systems where we don't quite know where the machine ends and the human being begins. I am thinking of the space system, which has introduced the new and maybe inhuman objective. The system has to work. No failures are allowed. No personal emotions or mistakes may interfere with the success of the project. Laboriously, we are translating every aspect of human language into computer language. The engineers are not visionaries. John Cage has recently written a wonderful How to Improve the World. As a blind engineer, one of his observations gave me a real jolt. Cage points out that there exists a system of interaction between human beings that exists without any police or power structure whatsoever. In fact, there are hundreds of agreements between countries that work perfectly well. It seems technology breeds agreement. So, of course, what he's talking about here is cybernetics, and the artists who got so excited by the cybernetic movement that had originally been written about in the 40s. And it's about this idea of systems theory and being able to reach agreement tacitly without needing any kind of outside organizational structures. So they're incredibly excited, and they're almost, I would say, a kind of euphoric optimism about the possibilities of this, which maybe we're now pulling back on a little bit and reconsidering. And so that statement, I think, is something to keep in mind. So he says this to sum up. First, the artists have to create with technology because technology is becoming inseparable from our lives. Today, technology is the extension of our nervous system, McLuhan said. Second, artists should use technology because technology needs artists. The artist's work is much like that of a scientist. It is an investigation, and this is quite telling. It is an investigation which may or may not yield meaningful results. In many cases, we will know only years later. What I am suggesting is that the use of the engineer by the artist will stimulate new ways of looking at technology and of dealing with life in the future. You might find it interesting to hear Kluver say, technology needs to be revealed and undressed, much like we undress a woman. There's a lot that could be unpacked in these few statements. For the moment, it's instructive to footnote both the motivations and collaborations which have led to burgeoning interdisciplinary practices using technology, and the almost euphoric and unhesitating embrace of the possibilities presented by technology, urged on by an underlying confidence in the apparent neutrality of the systems generated through technology. Assumptions which are being exposed and challenged by contemporary artists whose practices critically engage with these technologies and which are manifest and explored throughout this exhibition. So Electronic Superhighway takes its name from Namjin Pike's monumental sculptural installation of 1995. I'm sure everyone's quite familiar with this work. It's part homage to the interlinking system of road transportation that connected all of the different states that came to be known as the Interstate Highway System. It was begun by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1932 and wasn't finally proclaimed complete until 1992. The Smithsonian Institute, who now owns this work and in fact owns much of the legacy of Namjin Pike, writes that when Namjin Pike came to the United States in 1964, the interstate highway system was only 9 years old, and superhighways offered everyone the freedom to see the USA in your Chevrolet. Employing 336 television sets, 50 DVD players, 3,750 feet of cable, and 575 feet of multicolored neon tubing, this mammoth work presents an iconographic imagery on 51 channels, positing the construction of a shared identity through television. And there's a fantastic clip you can watch on the internet that tells you what was involved in the conservation and care of this work, and it just gives you an idea of what it must be to organize 336 televisions and keep them underway and deal with all the buses in the line, etc. This is the work that was actually in the show. Not surprisingly, the Electronic Superhighway, that the name of the exhibition actually wasn't shown at the exhibition. Instead, this work was shown, Internet Dream, and I think that's for obvious reasons. It was just too large of a work to transport and to actually show in the Whitechapel. However, the works established television's capacity to alter geographies and penetrate previously static and insurmountable boundaries. And this is what changes. This is the first thing that television and these kinds of transmissions and interconnections change. They change our conception of space. Suddenly everything becomes interconnected, distances are altered, distances cease to exist. It alters our notion of geography, distance is eliminated, and space becomes flattened. Unlike Richard Serra's darker narrative on the power of television articulated nearly 20 years earlier in Television Delivers People, Pike provides an optimistic, perhaps, as I've said, euphoric view of television's power to unite and connect. Electronic Superhighway asserts a transformation in our notion of space as distances that once seemed dauntingly vast instantly disappear. The exhibition itself unabashedly navigates the cacophony of radical anarchy that the web presents us, showing us a range of new media works which traverse geographies of time, distance, and materialized work that was made for a computer, and making transparent the relationship between the analog and the digital. Many of the works permit viewers a hand-on, playful, interactive, enticing engagement with the work. So Petra Kortright's System Landscapes and Pixel Paintings reverses the traditional indexical relationship between reality and image. Jacoby Satterthwaite's 3D animations, which emerged from drawings made by his mother while suffering from mental illness, and the paintings of Celia Hampton, whose fragmentary flash works endure only so long as she can hold a conversation in a chat room, all together with Thomas and Craig Head's Strange, I don't know if you know this work, it's really quite amazing. Thomas and Craig Head's strange karaoke love songs, none of which could exist without the internet, and challenge our acceptance of the stasis of art and the authorial voice of the museum, which is what we are, of course, all familiar with. They also engage the viewer to consider the relationship between the virtual and the physical, and the relationship between old and new media. And I'll tell you, this was a very interactive exhibition. The downstairs was full of young people. It was absolutely jam-packed all the time, and it felt like walking into the Apple store, not walking into a museum. So, are people familiar with Good Morning, Mr. Orwell? So, some of us are. Some of us might remember seeing it. So, yeah, do you want to... So this is the first time, this is January 1st, 1984, Namjoon Paik's creation, and it's the first time that we had this kind of live satellite transmission that connected up so many different people and locations, and was available and was seen apparently by 25 million people. And it's just, to think that this was 1984, it's just absolutely stunning. And of course, Pike and all the artists who worked on this, and there were some of the artists from the most remote regions of the avant-garde, I know Allen Ginsberg even has a piece on there, were trying to rebut the proposition in George Orwell's book, and were specifically encouraging us to look beyond 1984 and not to be afraid of Big Brother. I'm told that I have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly flash through some of these. So I'm just going to stop at John Latham's Full Stop, which John Latham is a British artist. He died in 2010, and this is his work, Full Stop 1961, which is a single shot of a spray gun on a blank canvas. And at some point in the 1960s, we entered a new moment in art history. The artist John Latham, who used a spray gun to spray a black dot on a white canvas, which he called his 1-second paintings, declared that with Rauschenberg's white canvases, the artist's deconstruction of space was complete. Time would now become the new medium for the artist. No longer confined to linear notions, traditional understanding of history becomes completely upended. time, simultaneity, history, teleology, the notion of progress, our Hegelian understanding of history that has driven so much of what art historians have done, gone, finished. Say goodbye to it. I'm going to skip a lot of these works, which are the newer pieces. Surveillance is another big issue. Gary T. Marks, which is a very important surveillance theorist, talks about what the maximum security society is. He has 6 statements about it. It's a dossier society in which computerized records play a major role, an actuarial society in which decisions are increasingly made on the basis of predictions about future behavior as a result of membership in and comparisons to aggregate categories, i.e. big data, a suspicious society in which everyone is suspected. And you know, that the most amazing thing about walking through that barrier when you're traveling now, which we all do quite a lot, as soon as you go through that machine, you never know if you're going to get stopped. It doesn't really matter what color you are, what religion you are, what you look like. You, inside of yourself, you're afraid. Am I going to get stopped? Is someone going to pull me aside? And it's totally random. So everyone is a suspect. An engineered society in which choices are increasingly limited and determined by the physical and social environment. A transparent society in which the boundaries of time, distance, darkness, and physical barriers that traditionally protected information are weakened. And a self-monitored society in which auto-surveillance plays a prominent role. And we have been talking about all the forms of auto-surveillance that we engage in. These are some of the issues, of course, that come out of that. This is an artist group, Zach Blass, who you probably know of, who uses a lot of strategies to infect and intervene in marketplaces and transactions of capitalism and get us to think about it. So I'll just close by noting some of the issues that we have. We have curatorial issues, we have practice, knowledge issues, we've been talking about them over the last few days. We have issues of conservation, and we have ethical issues that we have to face too as curators and as workers, as part of the museum art industry. I'm just going to close by reading something that Peter Weibel wrote. He has a very important exhibition going on right now called Open Codes. And the main theorem of open codes is the world is a field of data. And he asks us to look at all the different ways in which that is. The entire world is a field of data today. And he says for museums and for art spaces and project spaces, this really creates a new problem. As a thinking space, as co-working space, as assembly, as a new form of congregation to exchange and acquire knowledge, and a new form of collaborating. Citizens educate other citizens. An unusual, interactive mode of engaging with art introduces them to this new strategy of assembly. In part, the exhibition visitors themselves define a new format of exhibition as a preview of a future, self-confident and self-aware life that is not non-hegemonic. And he uses that word, I think Erinjin used it yesterday, which is, oh, I have to use this, hang on. This is what his vision for the new museum of the future is. The museum becomes a location for civic education where acquisition of knowledge is not only worthwhile but also rewarded. For the actual message of digital change, digital technology, digital change, is that the society of tomorrow will change, will have to change into the knowledge society. And we shall need culturally competent citizens in order to defend democracy in the future, because democracy needs thinkers. Thanks.